started. Just a reminder, I'm Melodie, right? I'm a vehicle to all of this people skills stuff, right? Bringing up conversations, ideas, taking on journeys outside of our manual and bringing more information. Just a couple of business items. Next week, we'll have a special guest, Eric Lipton from the National Alpine Team. He actually helped write the sections on trust, likability, and expertise, which as a group we've actually reviewed, but we're going to go back and look at it again with his filter. So I suggest that you read pages 26 and 27 in the Teaching Snow Sports Manual in prep for him. We had a really awesome prep call talking a lot about like the history, where does this come from, and how this basic concept feeds into so many other things that we experience, and we're seeing them maybe in this format. You know, again, maybe we've seen it in the past life, but also seeing it applied to our snow sports expertise. Awesome. And then just another reminder, I've had a couple of people say, oh, I just forgot, but it's one thing that I do when I'm planning, and this is even for me in this context, I take the Zoom link for this and I directly drop it into the URL within my calendar. So that way, if I'm on the run or whatnot, maybe I'm in the middle of a bike ride and I'm like, oh, look at that, it's 4:15 if I'm in Pacific time. And then I can just actually click the link directly to the Zoom from my phone. And that should work with any platform that you manage for a calendar, and can be a really nice way to just like not have to think about it at all. Because that's the last thing I want anyone to be doing, is to be thinking more than you feel like you need to be. All right, awesome. All right, quote for today. Practice active listening to enhance the way you judge situations and people. This is from Debbie David's How to Stop Lying. Sounds like a good read. All right, excellent. Okay, so let's dive in. What I want to start with is just offering some structures to what active listening is. I know in our manual, so again, if you want to reference pages 32 and 33, I want to first start with the definition that they offer us, and then go a little bit deeper into some external offerings. All right, so I'm just reading a short sentence from about halfway down the first paragraph, if you like to follow along. Active listening means making a conscious effort to listen fully, to take in all that is said. It's critical, not only for your own understanding, but also because the speaker needs to believe you are listening, to have a trusting relationship. Active listening also involves understanding and responding to the speaker. I instantly think about our people skills fundamentals, and this for me goes right to the top about trust. You know, we have our four people skills fundamentals, and they, as Dave Lyon likes to talk about, they work their way up. You start at the bottom and you work your way up to trust, right? So this to me, the more I dug into this topic, the more I realized that active listening is almost like the epitome of showing that you've developed the skills, right? And it's so easily can go down other tracks, as I saw in many excellent examples. And so I want to give everyone a couple of other examples, and then try hopefully pull some experiences as well. So as a definition of what this could look like specific to a learning environment, one, it starts with looking at the person and suspend all of the things that you are doing. So that means not babysitting a child or a dog while you're trying to pay attention. All right, it means not looking at your phone or not paying attention to the passerbys. Offering the opportunity to evolve an emotional connection includes nonverbal communication, like we talked about a couple of shows ago. Right? It means actually being focused on what's happening. Right? And this is really stinking hard. And I will later on offer some things that you can practice to develop this skill. I mean, I know so often, especially those of us who work in the outdoor industry, we have short attention spans. That is a fact, and I get it. And this becomes so much more difficult when we're asked to stay connected, right? Excellent. All right, so number 2, listen not merely to the words, but the feeling content. This is really tough. All right, so let's start by referencing back to our conversation about nonverbal communication and talking about how, just in self-reflection, if I have matched verbal and nonverbal skills, so like I'm saying, hey, I'm really happy and I'm smiling, right? That's match skills. All right, if I'm frowning and I'm looking upset and saying, no, I'm really happy, just believe me, right? That's mismatched skills. All right, so as a listener, being very conscientious about ourselves in this, but also when you're witnessing someone else who is speaking, noticing if they are matched, right? What's showing up? Are they talking about being uncomfortable in a situation and moving their body, right? Or are they moving away from you? Or do they perceive you as part of the thing that's making them uncomfortable? Do they move into you? Are they showing you physical signs of trust, right? So be aware of those nonverbal, specifically those nonverbal communications that will show up. Be sincerely interested in what the other person is talking about. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to take care of yourself, because for me, I quickly go there and think about like those locker room conversations where I'm like, I can't give you 100% right now. There's no way, right? And so how to manage those and take care of yourself so you can actually have a reasonable opportunity to be able to show up. Right. So restate what the person has said. And Katie Foyt talked about this in her talk from June 26th. And she talked about the difference between repeating what someone says and rephrasing. They're very different. When I come back to you and I say, oh, I see that you have a nice hat, right? And then you just come back to me and you literally say exactly the same thing to me. Like, you didn't really say, you didn't really hear me and you weren't listening to me either. But if you say, oh, I really like the pink in it, right? Now we're having a conversation, or at least we're referencing the same thing, right? You have actually gone the step further and offered a little bit of feedback, or you've noticed something else, or you've been able to pull out something a little deeper within that. All right. Excellent. Good. Ask clarifying questions. Right, so again, we're just working through the basics here first. So just clarify, like, hey, I missed that. Like, or you seem to be talking a lot about how you're uncomfortable or this change is hard for you. Can you tell me more about what that means? Right, so thinking about on the hill with snow sports, put a hand up if you've had a challenging group where, like, people are really, really struggling with doing something. Like, so if everyone here has worked with skiers, maybe they all have an inside foot lead, right? That's super common, right? So if you're working with them and they're just super uncomfortable, being able to communicate clearly with them about what it is that you're asking. So asking for a clarifying question. Hey, I noticed that your inside foot is leading when you're coming around the turn, right? And then can they come back to you and say, oh, I don't understand what that means, right? That's now your student. Now you get to be an active listener by saying, do you tell me what you're feeling, and then you get to pick up on the way they communicate. Is that connecting? I'm seeing some nods. Good. Okay, great, awesome. Okay, this one I feel like is really big for us. Be aware of your own feelings and existing opinions. This seemed to be one of the most common themes I read in our manual and also read in the supplemental information, is watch your own judgment. It's so easy to judge someone else and have that get in the way of you having an open mind and actually being capable of even hearing them. If you're already telling yourself a side story about this person, they've come to you and said, oh my gosh, I had the hardest day ever. I had to take out the trash. And in your head, you're saying, oh my gosh, is that the hardest thing that has ever happened to you in your whole life? Let me tell you, right? That's not very nice. And how on earth are you really going to be able to see where they're coming from? Because the truth is that if that's the hardest thing, and if that's a traumatic day for them, albeit let's show up for their trauma. That's okay. It's not up to us to judge what is or is not hard, or what is or is not trauma for them, what is challenging. And the second we throw in that judgment, our job as teachers and instructors is way harder, because now we're discounting that the thing we've asked them to do is hard, right? Think about how often you go out and ask an advanced skier, oh, well, how do you do what you're doing? They can barely tell you. So why wouldn't they just tell you, we'll just figure it out. What's wrong with you? Right? Now we're digging into shame. Right? So let's see if we can turn the judgment meter down. We're human. It's still going to be there. If you can notice it, if you can turn it down, and you can ask yourself to really hear where that person is at, then maybe you can hear the other supplemental bits that are showing up for that person who's having a hard day with taking the trash out, right? There's most likely more, right? Cool. All right, let's move on a little bit. I wanted to just list off a few active listening techniques, right? Building trust and establishing rapport. We talk a lot about that here, right? So establishing that, demonstrating concern, right? That ties us back to kind of being sincerely interested in what they say. Paraphrasing to show understanding. And I think that's really an important clarification as opposed to repeating, right? Using your nonverbal cues, which show that you understand what that person is saying. So eye contact, remember the example I just gave you of like moving far away or leaning in. So as a listener, you can also lean in and show them that you're interested. Shannon is actually demonstrating some really nice skills right now. She's got her head, she's right here if you can't see her. So she's got her hand here, and she has gradually actually moved into the screen since I've been talking. And that is encouraging to me, you know, as where like with Maria has shown, she's laughed and has given me great nonverbal cues, you know, and Howard has his thinking man on. So he's got his curved pointer finger. So all of these things provide different feedback for me. And you each as listeners to a student or somebody who needs your full attention and you want to provide an excellent active listening experience for them, ideally all the time, is noticing how you respond. You know, I encourage you to go back to nonverbal communication again, and to think about, get that mirror out. Look at yourself. You know, I'll own up that I have learned a lot about myself from doing these programs, because I have to look at my tiny box every once in a while as well. So thank you. Excellent. Let's get through the rest of these techniques. All right, so brief verbal affirmations like I see, I know. I'll take a little ownership. You probably hear me when I have special guests on. One of the things that I use is I say, to keep my guests talking. And what that helps me with, so that is also very self-serving, is it really keeps me focused on what they're talking about. Because if I am uh-huh-ing all over the place and it is not thoughtfully timed, I'm going to create disconnection. All right. Awesome. Good. And then allow for pause. So one of the things that I think is very embedded when we think about being an active listener is that we think that, holy smokes, I need to have an answer and to just give the best feedback the second this person stops talking. I want to give you permission right now. You do not. In fact, it's best if you don't. Let it seep in. All right? Give it a moment and give it pause. And that discomfort where you're maybe still just looking at them and there's no words, let that be there. Sometimes that's the most impactful thing. Maybe you're headed up to a big shoot that's outside of someone's normal choice for terrain, and it's really big, and this person is nervous. Your student is like, all this new stuff is bubbling to the surface, right? And most likely other emotions are going to come along with it, because usually when we go down the emotional highway, things like to jump aboard, right? And all of a sudden, you know, they're saying, well, this one time when I was 5, I was disapproved of because I didn't jump off the high dive, and now I'm just worried that I'm not going to be enough, and all this other stuff shows up too. And think about when that person tells you that story, and you can pause for a moment and look at them and say, you're enough to me no matter what you choose to do, right? Like, that's super impactful. Like, I'm thinking about how many times I would love to have heard that, and also the times I have, and it feels really nurturing. All right. Excellent. All right, so we've got, moving on from techniques. So I want to talk just briefly about what it looks like to stay connected, and we've touched a little bit on this embedded within the techniques and kind of the definition of what it is. Paying really close attention, we talked about physically moving in, keep the topic on them. So often, we are so eager to relate to what the person is saying that we insert our own personal experience to what they're talking about. And I want to tell you right now, unfortunately, that can be incredibly disconnecting. Because in an effort to say, hey, I know exactly what you're talking about, you know, I broke my leg too, let me tell you all about it. Well, now it's about me, right? Like, I've just taken this potentially vulnerable moment from my student or from my learner and turned it into a story about myself. And so I'm probably going to miss this opportunity. Again, our goal is trust. I've just probably actually broken some of that trust. This is a pretty common behavior that you'll see with humans, and I encourage you to heighten your awareness for it. All right, so keep it on them, right, as best as you can. Right? Maybe at the end of someone sharing their story, they might come back to you. They might come back and tell, have you ever broken a bone? I mean, I'm in my head, I'm thinking of a 6-7-year-old kid who's devastated. They've lost their season. You know, have you ever, that's a wonderful time for you to share your story. But in the middle, when they're telling you it hurts or this is what it was like, stay with them. Ask them more questions about themselves. Right? As humans, we really like to talk about ourselves, which means we can be impactful supporters by giving people space to talk about themselves. How's everyone doing? Good. I see. Awesome. I see smiles and thumbs up. I love it. Excellent. Good. We've talked about judgment. Look at this. I love it when things just kind of ease their way in. It makes me really happy. Good. All right, I want to talk just briefly about reaction versus response. So this was specifically on the page on 33, and it was mentioned really briefly. And I just want to make sure that we're clear on the difference. So a reaction is when you react to something quickly, typically without thought. And a response is something where you've taken a moment, you've thought about it. Maybe you've even said, hey, Jerry Ann, thank you so much for sharing that with me. Like, I have to be honest, I think I'm going to need a minute to take this in. I'm going to take responsibility for coming back to you. Right? That's kind of stuff's okay. Because I want to make sure that I am not just looking to say something for the point of saying something, but I'm saying something that is thoughtful and is also true to me, right? It kind of gives a little tinge of just agreeing to agree if I were to react, or if I were to say, oh, you know, that's so terrible. Well, maybe it's not so terrible, right? I don't know that yet. Maybe I get to digest and actually think about the person as a whole before I come back and respond. I do want to throw in just a couple of tools that I value and that kept showing up in some research here, is that look, it's okay to offer feedback, by way of question. So let me give you a quick example of what that looks like. It's like, maybe I say, hey, I hate my job, right? And then the person I'm speaking with says, well, why do you hate your job? And then I say, well, I hate that my job keeps changing. And then the response could be, well, tell me more about change. Do you dislike change? Right? So that's a feedback-based conversation that results in still keeping the subject on the person, right? And actually gets into what they're talking about, right? Quick and dirty. Awesome. And then it's also okay to come back, right? It's okay. Maybe you noticed, maybe you had a conversation, maybe Jeffra and I were talking, and I noticed I didn't hold the conversation with Jeffra, and that she, at some point, I paused 10 minutes later, and I realized, holy moly, Jeffra was telling me all about Cruiser, her dog, and I shifted the conversation to my dog, and this really looked important to her, right? But what I can do is I can come back and be like, Jeffra, I am so sorry I made a mistake. I took your incredible, like your story, that what you were telling me about Cruiser, and made it about myself. Can we start over? Can you tell me the rest of that story? Right? That's going to continue to build towards trust. Because I've also just demonstrated great self-awareness. If we're ever having a side conversation and I start talking about my pup, I'm sorry in advance. Excellent. And also, there are times when it is appropriate to interrupt. So if somebody is going off on a tangent and you can't follow them, you have no idea what's going on. I think the clinic term for this is getting into the weeds. Like when people start, it just feels like someone's not staying rooted, or you really don't understand. Ask, pause, and say, hey, I'm not with you, right? Can you say that again? And work with them to try to work your way back to whatever they want to say, right? Because if you don't really understand what they're saying and you just sit there and look at them and shake your head, you're not really doing them a service, right? And you're also not taking care of yourself, right? Oh my gosh, my timing on today's content is terrible. I have so much more. All right. All right, I'm gonna buzz through this, and if you're super inspired, I'm happy to provide more information. All right, so I'm gonna offer you the 3 A's, all right? Attitude, attention, adjustment, and the fastest definitions ever. Attitude is your underlying emotional state or your judgment. Again, use that previous definition of judgment. If you're in judgment, you're probably showing it, whether or not you like it or not. All right, your attention, full attention, like we offered earlier. All right, adjustment. This means going with the flow. All right, it means staying in the mood of the conversation, and it's also staying with the emotions of the conversation. Have you ever heard the term holding space? Right? So, hey, like, thank you for holding space for me, or something of that nature. That's really what this means. All right? It's staying with it. All right? A couple of things to work on that attention, as I promised earlier: playing memory games, reading, playing an observation recall. So you like look at a little photo with lots of little things in it, and you stare at it for like a minute on a timer, and then you turn the photo over and you recall all the things that you remember from it. All right, that's an excellent, that will help stimulate that build endurance for your attention. And then also possibly some meditation. All right, meditation is not a practice of perfection, it's a practice of what is. All right, so be kind to yourself as you move down that path. All right, I want to move on to taking care of your needs, and I want to start with a question. How many of you have found yourself with a student who is opening up? Right, so you're on a lesson, and all of a sudden their emotional experience has just moved to more of the extremes. So maybe all of a sudden they're having a meltdown, Maybe all of a sudden they're having the best day of their life, but it is in the extreme zones of an emotional experience. Anyone ever have that happen? My guess is everyone. I'm seeing some comfort laughs. Yes, good. Excellent. Awesome. Thank you, Randall. And so I want you to think about like how active listening plays a really important role into the experience of your student when these moments show up, right? The other example, and again, this will roll back into taking care of your own needs. Maybe your coworker rolls into the locker room and they start bad-mouthing your manager, right? As you're moving out to lineup. Like, for me, that's a no-go. And what I want to offer you are just a few things that you can say to take care of yourself, right? So you might start with, it's okay to say, this isn't a good time, all right? And that could look a few different ways. It could say, hey, I really want to hear what you have to say, but now's not a great time. I can't give you 100%. Right? But here's the thing I want to tack on to that is that if you do offer that, especially if it's something that's really important, and you'll know it's important because you're going to ask, right? And you then need to come back, right? So for example, let's use the person who's having an emotional overload and let's just move into sadness. So maybe for some reason, they're having a connection of riding their first double black, right? That's a really big deal for a lot of our snow sports students, even though we try not to have markers by terrain ratings. Is all of a sudden, all of their feelings about their grandma is showing up, who has passed away recently, right? These are real things that show up for us. It might look a little differently when it comes to you, but maybe you're on a chair with 2 other students and you're 3 minutes from the top, right? You're not really going to be able to show up wholeheartedly for that person. So something you might be able to say to them is, hey, like, I can see that this is really big for you and I want to be there for you. Can we grab a chair, just you and I, on the next lap so I can give you my full attention? And then just follow up and make sure it actually happens. You know, that's really impactful because at the end of the day, most likely all that person really needs is to feel seen. So basically what that means is feel like they are important enough for someone to pay attention to them. That's the basics of that. And again, all moving towards trust, right? So the other example might be if someone engages you in what you quickly can tell is going to be a deeper conversation and you realize you need to go to the bathroom, or you have something that is on your mind. Like maybe you are like literally in the middle of a text message to take care of something. It's okay to say, yes, can you give me 1 minute or 5 minutes, right? And come right back to it. Those things are fine. And I think that so often I see, and I've personally experienced, like, it's almost like we take on these experiences as though we're trapped, and you're not. And when you take care of yourself and you speak about your needs, the person that you are being a listener to is going to have a much better experience anyways, because you can actually show up. Okay. Excellent. Awesome. Look at this. Good. Thank you for the pause. I'm just checking to see if I left anything major out. Does anyone want to add? We've just got about a minute before we're going to wrap up, but does anyone have anything that they want to add to, or that they felt like really stood out for them? Maybe something from the reading. Yeah, Jeffra.
I think listening so often, people, when they're listening to reply, and instead of listening to actually hear what you're saying. To me, and I can, usually tell the difference, but that's something with me that I always try and do, is just listen to what someone's saying. And then, I like what you said about take the pause, because then you can respond.
Thank you, Jeffra. Yeah, the power of pause. Does anyone else want to share quickly before we wrap? Yeah, Hero.
I think the focus is, the main focus is supposed to be on that person, not on you. You mentioned that. And so when you go to judgment, that focus is, I know everything. I'm not listening anymore. I've already decided. And that's all. So it really is, the conversation is really to try to understand where that person is and what they're trying to say. They may say a word you took to mean this, but they meant something else. So that's where the interaction is, to clarify, to try to understand what that person is trying to say, not my interpretation or my judgment that I know what you're saying, so you don't need to talk anymore. I've decided.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for that, Hero. So many quick opportunities to like deconstruct the trust that you've been working on. You know, when we're the only ones, when we take any kind of emotional experience and turn it into our old story, or how we might have something that's better, or how we actually know everything. I mean, the truth is, and this is one of the things that I love about our people skills, is that it's really placing an emphasis on, we don't. And that's the truth. We don't know everything. And I know as a learner, I learn so much better when I am given modeling of it being okay to fail. It's okay to not always get it right. It's okay to not know everything, because it shows me, it gives me a little ounce of inspiration, which I really, really appreciate. And it also, and for me, again, that builds up into our trust. All right, it's a couple minutes after 5. Any burning last words? This always goes by so fast. Thank you, everyone. Again, reminder, next week, Eric Lipton, he's going to talk about trust, psychability, and expertise, pages 26, 27 in your manual. So we will dig way deeper than what we've looked at in the past. Oh, and awesome. I've got some good text here from Randall. According to Rogers, the therapist should provide what he calls facilitating conditions. Yes. Accurate empathy, congruence or transparency, and unconditional positive regard. Oh, awesome. Thank you for that link, Randall. I'll grab that and put it into the notes so other people can see it too. All right. See you next week. Thanks for showing up. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.